in computing, you do the same thing but in a digital realm. I want to apply this degree to evaluating artificial intelligence systems that interface with the public and make sure it does it in a way that's beneficial and not harmful. The story I tell about William isn't unique. Many young, promising Americans are not living up to their vast potential, and not for a lack of trying, but there's really been a lack of support. When adults lecture young people to, quote, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, they often miss the point that some students were never even provided with the boots. They didn't have the boots to yank themselves up. Getting any degree is expensive enough, but it's even further out of reach for so many young people when you factor in everything a student needs to succeed beyond tuition. Things like transportation, housing, food, books, access to technology, an array of other necessities. Many talented and promising students can't fulfill their potential and suffer in a system that lacks the potential to see that and see it and get them the opportunity for them to get ahead. And now, with deep cuts to programs like SNAP and Medicaid under the Republican disastrous recent budget bill, coupled with high housing costs and rising prices from the Trump tariffs, the safety net for students who fly solo is being slashed. Donald Trump and DOGE are even trying to take a sledgehammer to funding for key programs like Job Corps, which help young people get the resources they need to secure a degree and a good-paying job. So President Tim Cook is running not for office, but he's running for his students. He's pounding the pavement in the summer heat to highlight that when students' basic needs are met, they can focus on their education and create a brighter future for themselves, their families, and their communities. That's why I'm here on the floor today. I want to be part of sending Tim a powerful message that Congress agrees with him and not leave students behind. The world's next Einstein, and I say this to all my colleagues, may be in your town, scraping together a way to earn an education and make a positive impact on the community and the world. Let's help light the beacon of opportunity for those students. For America to be great, we've got to make sure that everybody in our country gets a fair shot. So I'll close by saying I'm gratified by the passion and insight that Tim Cook and other Oregonians are bringing to this cause. They understand the importance of investing in our kids, because that draws a map to a brighter future for all of us. It may not be possible for everybody to run 32 miles a day for nearly 2 months, but as senators, we can certainly make a difference. This country needs more common sense policies that put students first and prepare us all for a brighter tomorrow. That's what Tim Cook is bringing us. I yield the floor, and I urge all my colleagues to support these educators and others who are helping the students, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to urge my colleagues, and I know that there's this temptation of the upcoming summer break and folks want to get home to their families. But we have the opportunity and the obligation right now to pass this legislation for the Crime Victims Fund. Are we really going to miss this opportunity and this obligation when in my state, 1/4 of victims of domestic violence were turned away from services last year? These are the organizations, the child advocacy centers, the domestic violence agencies, the rape crisis centers who respond to the needs of the most vulnerable, neglected, and abused people in our states. We just spent last week defunding Big Bird. We spent an entire week defunding public television and public radio, and you mean to tell me that before we leave for the recess, we can't fund child advocacy centers, domestic violence agencies, and rape crisis centers? It's unacceptable. And this has bipartisan support, and we should pass this legislation right now. Here is what one organization in Georgia said if we fail to pass this bill. They said, quote, "Our organization would have to lay off approximately 50% of essential staff. We would not be able to support or meet the critical needs of victims in the community. The lack of support and services over time will negatively impact the community with an increase in crime and victimization." Mr. President, another organization in Georgia said, quote, "Without our centers, states will see an increase in domestic injuries, child abuse, sexual assault, and even death in many cases." Child abuse, sexual assault, death. In the state of Georgia, where hundreds of foster children have been trafficked by sexual predators, these are the organizations who support them and women facing domestic violence. This is a bipartisan bill led by Senators Durbin and Murkowski. It should have bipartisan support on the Senate floor right now. We should pass it before we leave for the summer. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I rise today to deliver my maiden speech. This is a proud and personal moment for me to represent my home state of Michigan as a junior senator alongside Gary Peters, and to follow in the footsteps of legendary senators like Debbie Stabenow and Carl Levin. This maiden speech has been a long-standing tradition in the Senate. Every junior member gets to deliver in their freshman year their vision for their state and what they plan to do in their time in office. Thank you to my colleagues from both sides of the aisle who have joined me, and to my great staff and my interns, even my niece who came in. If you remember nothing else, I want you to remember two things. First, nothing is more important to me than the state of Michigan. I'm a third-generation Michigander. For me, Michigan is where it all started. Everything I've done in my life, everywhere I've gone, everything I've done, everyone I've met, it all started in Michigan. It's where I learned the values that still shape me today. Community, putting your head down and working hard, taking care of your neighbors when they are in need. Nothing matters more than my home state. So this speech is my love letter to the state of Michigan. To stand here and represent the state that I love on the floor of the U.S. Senate is the greatest privilege of my life. Second, my goal for my time in office is to address what I believe to be the existential threat of our time, to my state and to all Americans, the threat of a shrinking middle class. Now, I'm a national security person by training. I'm what's called a 9/11 baby. I happened to be in New York City on my second day of graduate school when 9/11 happened. I was recruited into the CIA right out of grad school, and I served 3 tours in Iraq alongside our military before serving at the Pentagon. I served proudly under presidents, both Democrat and Republican. I've come face to face with some of the greatest threats facing our country, but I believe in my bones that the single greatest threat today to our national security is not coming from abroad, but coming from the very real threats that come from that shrinking middle class. So my goal as a senator is to deliver for Michigan's middle class, to expand it, to secure it. That mission is personal. Michigan is where my family achieved that very American dream. My great-grandfather, at 13 years old, came through Ellis Island, not speaking English. He ended up starting a meat company, moved to Michigan, and built that business and built an iconic hot dog that Michiganders have enjoyed for 60 years. Michigan has been the place where hard work means something. It's where the middle class was literally invented, where you could work at an auto plant and afford the car that you were building. That was a revolutionary idea at the time. It shouldn't be revolutionary now. So as a U.S. Senator, my highest priority is to help make Michigan a place where that American dream is achievable again. Today, too many Michiganders are falling out of that middle class. Too many families can't get in at all. I live on my family farm in Holly, Michigan. Growing up, I was surrounded by families whose path to the middle class ran through Michigan's factories, our farms, our small businesses. We are people who build things and grow things. People proud of their role in manufacturing Americans' future. Our cars, our tanks, our food. People who, like my great-grandfather, were prepared to work hard for success and often achieved it. But over the years, I've watched younger generations of those same families live a very different story. Parents can't provide for their kids what was provided to them. That fishing cabin up north that Dad had, the son can't have. A trip to Disneyland, can't do it. Across Michigan, there are so many families who feel like hard work doesn't seem to be enough anymore. No matter what your political views are, it is just a fact that the middle class has shrunk over the past 40 years. And I've seen firsthand what happens next. When people feel like they can't get ahead, when they can't provide for their kids what was provided for them, they feel anger, they feel shame, they lose their dignity, and they look for something or someone to blame. In a multiracial, multi-ethnic experiment in democracy, people end up blaming people who don't look like them, or speak like them, or pray like them. I've seen this up close and personal, how that kind of anger and suspicion can tear communities apart. If you want to understand how we got to this moment in our politics, this angry, vitriolic, polarized moment in American history, all you have to do is understand that shrinking middle class. So even among today's chaos, especially now, there are things we have to do, simple things, to bring back that middle class and make it thrive. This is my North Star. It will guide my work in the Senate. Okay, so how do we do that? Our government certainly needs to change. I don't think it's hard to understand that our government is not working for a majority of Americans, not just Republicans, Democrats as well. And you have to hear that loud and clear. Fundamentally, I believe that government needs to get back to the basics. No one cares about your trick plays if you don't have your fundamentals right. Government needs to set the conditions for success, and Michiganders and Americans need to work hard to achieve that success. These basics are jobs that pay you enough to save every month, healthcare you can actually afford, a home you can call your own, schools that prepare our kids for the workforce, energy to power our lives, an environment we can pass on to our kids, and safety and security from fear. That is it. First, on jobs. We need job creation for Michigan's middle class to create the jobs of the future. Imagine that the middle class is basically a ship at sea. For the better part of 40 years, it's been taking on water, and now we're about to hit a Category 5 hurricane in the form of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has the potential to change our economy more than the internet did. Think about that. Productivity will go up, jobs will be gained, but jobs will also be lost. Maybe not Michigan jobs at first. Entry-level college jobs like paralegals or accountants are probably first on the list, but change is coming and we need to be ready. Job creation in the era of artificial intelligence means supporting our small businesses. Small businesses employ half of all Americans. They are intrinsic to the American dream. It's about betting on yourself. And we need to own the fact that it is hard to start and succeed as a small business. We need to make life easier for Michigan small businesses. Second, we need to bring critical industries and critical supply chains back home to the United States. Michiganders understand this better than most because of what we do in manufacturing. No foreign country should ever have a veto on our economic security. We should always make critical items here in the United States, and I want to bring as many of those jobs and industries back to Michigan. And finally, let us say it very clearly. We need an immigration system that actually works and is keyed to our economy. Immigrants are critical for our labor shortages, in our factories, in our hospitals, in our firms. More than that, we are a nation of immigrants. I'm standing here today because my great-grandfather left fear of persecution and death at 13 years old and found a place in America. So we need an immigration plan that brings legal, vetted immigrants into our countries, heed to our economy, sometimes more, sometimes less, and we need to have border security that literally makes sense. Without immigrants, there is no America, and without immigrants, our economy will not thrive. Second, on health care. Is there anyone in America who thinks health care is working? Is there anyone in America who thinks we are paying too little for health care? Is there anyone in America who is missing the groundswell of anger because we cannot provide the health care we need to our parents and to our children? Few things are as fundamental. There are just, in my mind, few systems as broken as health care in America in 2025, and we all know it. This is, again, extremely personal to me. It's why I ran for office in the first place. Of all my time spent in war zones, in dangerous places, nothing was harder than my mom being diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer when she did not have insurance. There is nothing worse than that desperate feeling when your parent, that first parent to get sick, needs emergency tests and emergency surgery. And the same moment that you are fighting to get those things, you are struggling just to fill out the paperwork so she won't go bankrupt. We are at a breaking point. We must change our health care, and this is as good a time as any. Every American deserves access to health care they can afford, regardless of your job, regardless of your income or your age. So I support a nationwide public insurance plan at a reasonable price for every American. Second, we gotta be able to afford the medicines that we are prescribed. Is there anyone who thinks that we are paying too little for our drug prices? We need, in every part of our healthcare system, to be able to negotiate the price of our drugs. It's like Costco. You buy in bulk, you get a lower per unit price, and we are prohibited from doing that across the country. Why? Because I have never seen an issue in Washington more polluted by lobbyists and corporate PAC donations than this issue. I have never seen an industry with more control over elected leaders than on the issue of health care. Right now, I am one of 6 senators who doesn't take corporate PAC money, 6 out of 100. It should be 100 out of 100. The middle class does not have a lobbyist, but they sure have the leaders that they elected. On housing, there's nothing more foundational to the American dream than having a home of your own. It is as fundamental to us as Americans as apple pie. Right now, the average age of a first-time homeowner in America is 40 years old, completely different than in generations before us. This is not a good story. Today, we could declare in this body a housing state of emergency. We need 4 million units of housing built in our country. That's a national strategy, yes, but I want Michigan to be ground zero for responding to the urgency of that need. On education, we need schools that actually prepare our kids for the future. So much of what we were able to do as a middle class was because people could afford the education in front of them. If you wanted to go to college, you could. But in Michigan, you wanted to work with your hands, succeed, go on, become rich. Only if you had a high school diploma, you could do that. There were job options for you. We need an obsessive focus and reorganization of our job training federal programs. We have 17 different organizations doing job training. It's broken. We need to focus on trade schools and apprenticeships and an education system that prepares us for what is coming. On energy, we all know we're using more energy. Every single one of us in this room right now are using more energy than we did 10 years ago. Modern life is demanding it. But supply isn't meeting demand. And Michiganders are seeing that hitting their wallets every single day. If you don't plan now, it's going to get worse. Rolling blackouts and brownouts in a decade. And what I'm asking for is not a renewable energy plan or a fossil fuel plan. It's an all-of-the-above energy plan. Natural gas. You can't do it without it. Nuclear, batteries, renewables, solar, hydropower, new stuff that's in creation right now. We need all of it. And we can't be willing to scrap certain energy because it's woke. Anyone who disagrees with that is just scoring political points and doesn't give a damn about people's electricity bills. On the environment, I'm committed to protecting the environment, especially our water. In Michigan, clean water and the Great Lakes are not partisan. It's our heritage. It's in our blood. No single Michigander lives more than 6 miles away from a lake or 82 miles from a Great Lake. We all know the sound of water hitting the beach or how the light looks up north. Our water is why people raise their kids in Michigan, and sharing that legacy with our kids is the dream that every Michigander has. We have the responsibility of being the stewards of the Great Lakes. So when our water is threatened, when our kids are poisoned, when they can't swim in contaminated lakes, it's not just a health issue. It's a security issue. Lead, PFAS, invasive species in our Great Lakes, these are threats to us as Michiganders, and it's my job to fight these threats. And last, can we just say that climate change is upon us? 20 years ago, it was theoretical. Now, Michiganders understand that extreme weather is real. It is here. They feel it in their pocketbooks. We have to mitigate it, we have to accept it, and we have to be ready to prepare ourselves when we have these crazy ice storms, these crazy once-in-a-generation tornadoes, and move on and not exclude people because they don't want to talk about, woke policies. Safety and security, finally. Every Michigander has the right to live free from fear, to feel safe in their own homes and in the country they love. That's what got me into public service in the very beginning, right after 9/11. Shootings in our schools and our businesses are a threat to our lives. Our government and our computers, our personal data shouldn't be hacked. Neither should our cars or our homes. And we should get to know and understand always who is coming across our border. We're a border state in Michigan. Every country in the world has the right to know who's coming inside its borders. So in the Senate, I'm going to spend my time protecting American citizens as I have always done. For that, we need the best military in the world, one that understands the threats that are coming around the corner, not just the threats of the past. We need to be able to control our own fate. That means not letting our national debt be controlled by countries like China. And we need to understand that to make people safe in America, we need a strong leadership role in the world. Because the next 100 years are either going to be dominated by the United States of America or by China. And while we make mistakes every single day, and I will own that, I served in Iraq and I saw it close up, I will take American leadership over Chinese leadership any day of the week. So, in conclusion, let me just say that we all know, everyone here knows, that we're going through an extremely tough time in American politics. We know that when people look back on this period in history, they are going to say that was the moment that Americans were turned against each other, when neighbors turned against each other. But it is not the end, and it is not always going to be this way. As Michiganders, we understand how to survive bad times by rallying together, by helping one another, by living up to our Midwestern values, and getting back into the fight. As elected leaders, and certainly as a senator, I have a responsibility to chart the path through the dark tunnel and into the light, not by just complaining and whinging that it's all bad, but by charting a strategy from beginning to end on how we get through this moment. And we will. For God's sakes, people, the Detroit Lions are going to win the national championship and the Super Bowl, and they were in the toilet for years. So, it is my privilege to stand on behalf of my state here. It is the most important thing I've ever done. It is the most impactful thing I will ever do. It is my job as that next generation of leader to change the course of this place and this country, and I commit to you I will not let you down. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Mr. President, when it comes to one of the most basic necessities in life for people, housing, both political parties have failed. Both political parties have failed. Housing costs more than ever today, with the median home costing 5 times as much as the median income for your average American. First-time home buyers are fewer and older than ever. 1 in 4 renters are being forced to spend more than half of their income on rent, and homelessness is plaguing more people than ever before. This crisis was not inevitable. It is a problem that the government has created. There is not enough housing in this country because we have made it virtually impossible to build housing. Ask anyone who has tried to build anything, a shed, a patio, an accessory dwelling unit for their in-laws. They will tell you that the moment you try to do something, there are endless procedural hurdles and regulatory barriers that immediately get in the way. Exclusionary zoning, minimum lot sizes, height restrictions, requirements for multiple staircases, environmental reviews, dozens of public meetings where the grouchiest people in your neighborhood can stop the most virtuous project in your neighborhood. Extensive permitting paperwork, years-long battles with community organizations and boards, and if you want to expedite your permit, you can pay a permit expediter. If you've got 10 grand, they'll put your thing on the top of the pile. Nobody should like this system. I cannot think of something so essential to American life, housing, whether you rent or you want to own, so essential to American life, where the government has created the shortage on purpose and then it strokes its chin, confused as to why there is a shortage. There is a shortage because of us. There is a shortage because of the government itself making it hard to construct the thing that we all say we want. But the good news is this: if the government got us into this mess in the first place, it can help to get us out. And mainly, that means getting out of our own way and not preventing the very things that we say that we like. A lot of progressives in my own party like to say, we're for housing, we're for clean energy, we're for transit and infrastructure. But you can't be for something if you don't want it near you. If you're for housing, you got to see the housing. If you're for clean energy, you're going to see a windmill or a wind farm or a nuclear power plant somewhere. As we envision a just and sustainable and wealthy country, we have to actually make the things that make us more sustainable and wealthy. There is nothing progressive about preventing a nurse or a firefighter or a teacher or a small business owner from actually living in the community in which they work. There is nothing progressive about making people drive an hour to work, or in Hawaii, forcing people to leave the state. Lawn sizes and building heights don't make neighborhoods. People do. And yet, you'll often hear people who oppose new housing say things like, well, we want to preserve the unique character of the neighborhood. And this is something that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know until I came to the United States Senate. Understand what those words mean and where they came from. They are echoing a dark time in American history of the Jim Crow era. It was a time when communities specifically codified into law language that prohibited black people and other racial minorities from moving into certain neighborhoods. The racial covenants would literally say, quote, "No lot covered by this indenture or any part thereof shall ever be sold, resold, conveyed, granted, devised, leased, or rented to or occupied by or in any way used by any person or persons not of the Caucasian race. That's from a covenant in St. Louis from 1949, and there were contracts just like that one in neighborhoods all across the country. And then racial covenants were outlawed. But their legacy continues today, because what happened was the racists, after this was outlawed, figured out a proxy for race, figured out a way to keep people separated, figured out a way to keep people out of their neighborhoods, figured out a way to make housing more constrained. And that's exclusionary zoning. That's minimum lot sizes. That means you need interior staircases. All of these things that sound virtuous: safety, sanitation, environmental review, historic preservation, all of those things actually matter, but understand that they are being weaponized against the working class. They are being weaponized against the working class, and I'm not sure if this is permissible under the rules, but I'm looking at a bunch of Senate pages, all 16 years old, trying to figure out, where am I going to live when I get a job? Do I have to live with my folks? And for how long? Am I going to be able to move to a suburb or a city or stay in my hometown? Where am I going to live? So how do we fix it? First of all, government has a role that is not just getting out of the way. On the financing side, on the public housing stock side, on vouchers, on Section 8, on HUD-VASH, there are lots of programs that work on the low-income housing tax rate. A lot of government things that we do that have helped and can help more. But the truth is that the throughput capacity of the system is being constrained by the government itself. We could allocate $3 trillion to affordable housing. And if it's still hard to build a house in an individual neighborhood, all that money would get stuck. Actually, the state of California tried that. They allocated an enormous amount of money to housing, and they didn't get very much built. County of Maui, many years ago, said, no new housing unless it's affordable, which kind of like lands on the ears in a wonderful way, right? No new housing unless it's affordable. You know what happened? There was no new housing at all for a full decade. And so we just have to embrace, on the left, the reason I care about this is because I think it is the single most impactful economic policy that we can implement to make it easier to build housing for working people, for students, for the disabled, for the elderly, for the entrepreneurs, for cities, for towns, for rural neighborhoods. This is important because I care about that. Now, if you are a conservative, the basic principle is almost even more simple, which is, it's your damn property. You should be permitted to do what you want with your property, within certain safety boundaries and all the rest of it. But if it's your property, and you've got 1/4 of an acre, and you want to build an accessory dwelling unit for your kids, because they're adults and they just had a baby, you should be allowed to do pretty much whatever you want with your property, but we have inverted the presumption so that it's your neighbors that get to decide what you get to do with your property. So if you're a private property rights person, you should love the idea of deregulating the housing market. And if you are a progressive, and you see how much people are struggling right now, you should love the idea of deregulating the housing market. We need to reform land use laws for upzoning to allow higher density, reducing minimum lot sizes, deploying manufactured homes, enabling single-room occupancy development wherever multifamily housing is allowed. And we know all of this works because it's working in certain places. It's hard to keep any issue out of the partisan crossfire. It really is. Hard to keep anything out of the partisan crossfire, where everyone retreats to their own corner and starts talking past each other and trying to light the algorithm on fire. Our ability to come together, use common sense, and find a way forward will affect how people live and succeed for generations to come. Just this week, Senator Banks and I introduced legislation to incentivize local governments to build more housing near federally funded transit projects. Senator Young and I introduced the YIMBY Act, the Yes in My Backyard Act, which encourages localities to cut onerous regulations and adopt pro-housing policies. We can and we do disagree about almost everything, but on this, we should all be able to agree. In the richest country in the history of the world, people should not have to worry about having a roof over their heads. We can fix this, and we must. I yield the floor.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, the Trump corruption of the Environmental Protection Agency continues apace, so I'm here today in opposition to the nomination of Aaron Szabo to serve as the Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation over at EPA. The Constitution provides the President the power to nominate ministers and officers of the United States, and the Senate advice and consent power over his nominees. I think we probably agree that the Constitution means something, that advice and consent is not a mere rubber stamp, that when a nominee comes before your committee, they should provide straight answers to questions. Well, this nominee dodged our questions and then doubled down with more obfuscation when we gave him a chance to clarify through questions for the record. That alone should be sufficient reason to withhold consent until proper answers are obtained. This character, Szabo, is credited by name as a contributor to the EPA chapter of Project 2025, the extremist, right-wing, fossil fuel-funded blueprint for dismantling the federal government, which President Trump is now dutifully implementing. Some of the environmental highlights from Project 2025: weaken the Clean Air Act by reversing the endangerment finding, purge the agency, and bring to its staff trauma. In case you aren't keeping score at home, EPA Administrator Zeldin is already hard at work on these. Szabo was an advisor to the America First Policy Institute, the Trump-aligned think tank funded by fossil fuel and aligned with big oil interests. He worked as a lobbyist, pushing the interests of major polluters, like members of the American Petroleum Institute. Well, chief on the wish list of his former clients is rescission of the EPA endangerment finding. That was a 2009 evidence-based determination that greenhouse gases, in fact, are harmful to human welfare and the environment. When that rule was adopted back in 2009, it had actually already been settled scientific fact for decades that greenhouse gases harm the public and the environment. Now, 16 years later, the evidence has only gotten stronger, and the looming economic dangers of climate collapse have only gotten more evident. The only people who benefit from repealing the endangerment finding are the planet's biggest polluters, Mr. Szabo's former clients. To me, Mr. Szabo's recent work and professional affiliations should also render him unfit for the role to which he has been nominated. Is this really what we want for the EPA? Is this really how we protect clean air, by helping polluters rule the roost? It gets worse. When questioned at his hearing about his ties to Trump's donors' extreme anti-environmental agenda, Szabo provided obfuscatory answers. He acknowledged that he was a contributor to Project 2025, which he could hardly fail to do since his name was on it, but he stated that he kept no records of his contributions to that effort. He was asked whether he had no records because he never had any, or because he deleted them, couldn't answer, bumbled, stumbled, bobbed, weaved, dodged, and ultimately refused to answer, although he did concede that some of the advice he had provided was written advice. Following up with subsequent QFRs on the topic, we got from Mr. Szabo a sudden response, albeit one that does not seem credible, particularly in light of his previous inability to answer the question. He wrote, "Like millions of other Americans, I've been the subject of attempts to steal personal information through electronic means. I, like many federal government employees, had their completed standard Form 86, titled Questionnaire for National Security Positions, stolen in 2015. That included sensitive information. I periodically delete old messages and documents that are no longer necessary to help ensure privacy and security to my family, those I interact with, and myself." Seriously. Szabo had plenty of time to provide that response during his confirmation hearing, but he never mentioned anything of the sort. And to be clear, his contribution to the anti-environmental portion of Project 2025 is hard to connect with any issues of family, privacy, and security. To be clear, this is not entirely about whether you approve or disapprove of Project 2025. What's relevant here is the extreme degree of evasiveness in answering, or more exactly, not answering our questions. Senators are constitutionally obligated to provide advice and consent on the prominent president's nominees, so we should demand better than this in the people we confirm to serve in the most senior positions in our government. The current status of dodgem in our nominations hearings is a disgrace. Beyond Mr. Szabo's own questionable qualifications and his deceptiveness and his troublesome testimony, we also cannot ignore the full-on corruption of EPA on behalf of Trump's polluting fossil fuel donors. Corruption well underway. I already mentioned the endangerment finding, but there's more. Proposed deregulatory efforts will make cars dirtier and less fuel efficient. Why? So Trump's donors in the oil industry can sell more gasoline. They will let power plants and oil and gas facilities spew more carbon dioxide and methane without limits. Why? So Trump's fossil fuel political donors can sell more oil and gas to those facilities. EPA is even attempting to shut down the program that keeps track of how much carbon pollution industrial facilities emit. See no evil, hear no evil. The Trump corruption train rolls on, and to allow one of the architects of the EPA section of that fossil fuel-funded Project 2025 free rein to dismantle an office that is so central to the agency's core mission and to the protection of all our constituents will do nothing to help anyone except the interests of the polluters who fund President Trump and, I may add, the Republican Party. I will vote no on his nomination, and I strongly urge my colleagues to do the same for a multiplicity of good reasons. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. In November, President Trump and Republicans really received a very powerful mandate from the American people. They wanted to make certain that our border was going to be secured, that we were going to strengthen the economy, get inflation under control, rein in wasteful government spending, and get ourselves back on track, make America grow.